Heart-melting. Could this be the most adorable moment in Lee Min-ho and Song Hye Kyo's love story yet? Imagine the nation's most beloved leading man humming a sweet tune to baby while effortlessly cooking breakfast for the woman who stole his heart. What was on the menu? And what made this morning so special? Join Red Carpet Revealed as we uncover the tender details right now. The first rays of morning sunlight crept silently through the tall windows of the kitchen, spilling in like liquid gold and draping themselves across the polished countertops. Outside, the city was still stretching awake, a soft hum of life in the streets below. But here, inside this quiet, cocoon space, the world felt smaller, gentler. There was no bustle, no flashing cameras, no pressure to be perfect. The scent of warm bread, the slow hiss of butter melting on a hot pan, and a voice, low, warm, and impossibly tender, humming a melody so sweet it seemed to belong to another time. Lee Min-ho stood by the stove, an apron slung loosely over his tall frame. His hair was a little messy, not yet touched by the meticulous styling the public always saw. In this light, he didn't look like the global superstar whose face adorned billboards and magazine covers. He looked like a man at home, in the middle of something private and precious. His hands moved with quiet purpose, flipping a golden pancake with one hand while holding a small spoon in the other, stirring a pot of porridge that simmered gently beside him. And then there was the voice, his voice. Not a booming, commanding baritone he might use on stage or in a drama, but a softer, almost lullaby-like tone, carrying a tune that wrapped around the room like a blanket. Cushioned high chair a few feet away, a baby sat kicking its tiny legs with glee, the oversized bib around its neck covered in cartoon animals. The baby's eyes, wide, curious, and sparkling, followed every move Min-ho made, breaking into delighted squeals whenever he leaned closer. With each note he sang, the child seemed to recognize something, perhaps the rhythm of safety, the melody of love. The sound of their shared morning was broken only by the occasional giggle from the little one and the gentle clink of utensils. From the doorway, unseen by either of them, Song Hye Kyo watched. She stood there, frozen in a moment she knew she'd want to keep forever. Her hands curled around the frame, her breath caught in her throat, not because she was surprised to find him cooking, but because of the way he was doing it. There was a rhythm to him, a choreography that wasn't about efficiency but intention. The way he bent down to meet the baby's gaze before returning to the stove. The way his song shifted between playful and soothing, as if he instinctively knew what the little one needed to hear next. And the way the sunlight framed him, as though the morning itself had conspired to make him look even more like the hero from every romantic drama he'd ever starred in. She thought about how rare mornings like this had become. Their schedules were a constant tug-of-war, film shoots in far-off locations, press tours in different countries, the relentless pace of an industry that never slept. Here they were, in this quiet kitchen, with no one else to witness the softness of the moment but her. For a second, she considered taking out her phone to record it, but the thought quickly vanished. No camera could capture the way her heart felt right now. It wasn't something to post or share, this was theirs. Min-ho's voice shifted to a familiar tune, a song Hye Kyo remembered from their early days together. It was one he had sung to her once, long before they'd ever talked about family or babies. On a late-night drive when the city lights blurred into streaks outside the car windows. She remembered teasing him then, saying he should save that voice for the studio. But now, hearing it again, softer, slower, carrying a depth it hadn't before, she understood he'd saved it for something more important. The smell of breakfast grew richer, layers of scent weaving together, the butter, sweetness of honey, the earthy warmth of oats. Min-ho reached for a small ceramic bowl and ladled the steaming porridge into it, adding a drizzle of golden syrup on top. He set it on the counter, then turned his attention back to the pancakes, stacking them neatly before dusting them with powdered sugar. Every motion was deliberate, careful, as if the food was an offering, not just a meal. "Are you ready for the best breakfast in the world?" he asked the baby. His voice still sing-song, but now laced with that teasing lilt that made even the simplest question feel like part of a game. The baby squealed in response, hands flapping excitedly. Min-ho laughed, a sound that made something inside Hye Kyo tighten. It wasn't the polite laugh he gave interviewers or the carefully measured chuckle he offered fans. It was the unguarded, from the belly kind of laugh that came from pure joy. When he leaned in to wipe a smear of drool from the baby's chin, the child reached out and grabbed at his apron strings. Insistently. He let the tugging happen, not rushing to untangle himself. Instead, he bent lower, his forehead nearly touching the baby's, and began to hum again. The melody was different now, slower, softer, almost like a secret being whispered. The baby stilled, watching him with an intensity that only very young children possess, as though trying to memorize the moment. And in a way, maybe they were. From her spot in the doorway, Hye Kyo felt a pang, not of sadness, but of something deeper, heavier, more consuming. Gratitude, maybe. Or love in its most unguarded form. She thought of the countless red carpets they walked, the glittering events where they'd been the picture of perfection, the envy of onlookers. None of it compared to this. Here was Minho, sleeves rolled up, singing to a baby in the golden quiet of morning, making pancakes like it was the most important thing in the world. She didn't realize she'd taken a step forward until the floor creaked beneath her. Minho turned, catching sight of her, and his smile broke across his face like sunlight on water. "You're up," he said, as if she hadn't been standing there for the better part of 10 minutes. Tone carried no surprise, only the kind of warmth that made her want to cross the room in 2 strides. "Didn't want to interrupt," she said, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial, like she was afraid the moment would vanish if she spoke too loudly. "You seemed busy." Busy? He glanced down at the baby, then back at her, his eyes crinkling. "This is my favorite kind of busy." He let out a sudden squeal, drawing their attention. Minho lifted the child out of the high chair with practiced ease, settling them against his chest. The little one immediately reached for his hair, tugging gently. He didn't mind. If anything, he seemed to lean into it, humming once more as he swayed gently in place. Hye Kyo stepped closer, drawn in as if by gravity, till she was close enough to smell the faint trace of soap on his skin beneath the richer scent of breakfast. She reached out, brushing her fingers against the baby's tiny hand. "I think someone's ready to eat," she murmured. "I was just about to serve," Minho replied. But first, he bent his head, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead, lingering just long enough to make Hye Kyo's chest ache. Then, without breaking his hum, he carried the baby to the table, setting them gently into a smaller chair. Hye Kyo followed, her eyes still fixed on him, wondering how many mornings like this they'd have in their lifetime. Not enough, she thought. Never enough. As they sat down together, the world outside seemed to fade further. The city could wait. The cameras could wait. In this little corner of the morning, there was only the 3 of them, and the song Minho kept humming. A tune that seemed to promise that no matter where life took them, there would always be mornings like this, tucked away from the noise, just for them. The first bite of pancake was met with a delighted hum from Hye Kyo, eyes widening slightly in genuine appreciation. "You've outdone yourself," she said, her voice carrying that quiet sincerity that made Minho's lips curve in a slow, almost shy smile. It was a look she'd seen countless times in public. Fans swore he was effortlessly confident, the kind of man who could charm an entire crowd without breaking a sweat. But here, in the small intimacy of their kitchen, there was no calculated charm, no performance, only a man whose happiness was tied to the simplest of things, her approval. A giggle from the baby. Comfort of this shared morning. Minho cut a tiny piece of pancake and blew on it gently before offering it to the baby, whose eager little mouth opened right on cue. The child's expression, pure bliss at the taste, made both of them laugh. "I think I have some competition," Hye Kyo teased, sipping her tea. "Possible," Minho replied instantly, without even looking up. The tone was playful, but the glance he finally gave her was something else entirely, something warm, rooted, almost like a silent vow. It made her cheeks warm. He hid it by taking another sip. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, flooding the room with light. It glinted off the wedding band on Minho's finger, catching Hye Kyo's eye. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a reminder of everything they'd weathered to be here. The long stretches apart, the rumors, whispers that they wouldn't last. But here they were, pancakes to a baby while the world spun madly on without them. She reached for his free hand across the table, fingers brushing lightly against his. His thumb instinctively began to trace slow circles on her skin. A silent thank you. "Do you remember," she began, "the first time you cooked for me?" Oh, chuckled. "How could I forget? I nearly burned the kitchen down." "You made instant ramen," she corrected, smirking. And you were so nervous you put in 2 seasoning packets by accident. It was gourmet ramen, he said in mock defense, his grin deepening. Recipe. The baby let out a sudden coo, as if to interrupt their playful bickering, and Minho shifted his focus back to the little one, wiping a dab of syrup from their cheek. But his eyes lingered on Hye Kyo a moment longer than necessary. Caught it, that flicker of something unspoken. There were words he wasn't saying, feelings he didn't have to voice because they were already written all over his face. When breakfast was done, Minho lifted the baby from the chair and settled them on his hip with an ease that came from practice. Come on, he said softly. Let mommy rest for a bit. The way he said it wasn't casual, it was deliberate. Acknowledgement of her, of the life they'd built together. Kyo followed them into the living room, watching as he spread a soft blanket on the floor and set the baby down among a small army of plush toys. He joined a little one, crouching low and picking up a stuffed bear. What followed was a scene so tender it made her chest ache, Minho giving the bear a deep, theatrical voice, pretending it was a chef asking the baby for a pancake recipe. The child's laughter rang out, high and unrestrained, and Minho looked at them like they were the most fascinating thing in the world. For a while, Hye Kyo just watched. These were the moments that wouldn't make it into the tabloids or the interviews, the ones that didn't need to. This was their real life, stripped of glamour, built on small rituals and shared glances. Eventually, Minho noticed her watching. You know, he said, still keeping his voice in the bear's playful register. You could join us. I'm just enjoying the show, she replied, settling on the sofa. The bear dropped to his side as Minho leaned back, propping himself on one elbow. It's not a show, he said quietly, his tone shifting into something more serious. This is the best part of my day. Her breath caught. She wanted to tell him she felt the same. That in all the years she'd known him, it was mornings like this, not the premieres, not the awards, that she cherished most. But the words tangled in her throat. So instead she crossed the room, kneeling beside him on the blanket. The baby reached for both of them at once, her tiny hands bridging the space between them. For a long time, they stayed like that, the three of them wrapped in a bubble that felt untouchable. City noise outside grew louder, the day inevitably pressing forward. But inside their apartment, the world moved at a different pace. It wasn't until the baby began to grow restless that Minho reluctantly stood. Nap time, he announced, lifting the little one into his arms. Just a kiss to their head and then, without thinking, his lips over Hye Kyo's hair as he passed her. The gesture was so natural, so ingrained, that it barely registered, except to her. She watched him carry the baby down the hall, his tall frame softened by the way he leaned his head toward theirs. When he returned, the apartment felt quieter, the morning having shifted into that calm, suspended space that comes after the busyness of breakfast. Minho found her still sitting on the blanket, absent-mindedly folding it. Without a word, he sat beside her, stretching out his legs and leaning back on his hands. Do you ever think, he began slowly, how different our lives are now? She smiled faintly. Every day. I used to think happiness was bigger, flashier, he admitted. I thought it was about the roles I landed, the crowds cheering, the way people looked at us on the red carpet. Now, he broke off, glancing toward the hallway where the baby was sleeping. Now it's pancakes and lullabies. Her eyes softened. And you're okay with that? More than okay, he said, his voice steady, certain. I'm exactly where I want to be. The simplicity of the statement settled over her like a warm blanket. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked quietly in the background, marking the seconds of the morning they both knew they'd remember for years. And then, as if the world couldn't help itself, the spell began to break. His phone buzzed on the counter, messages, reminders, the inevitable pull of their public lives. But Minho didn't move to answer it. Instead, he reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Stay here a little longer, he murmured. They did. The messages could wait. The world could wait. Here. Part of their home. There was no need for anything else. Later, when the day had claimed them, when the meetings and rehearsals and calls had begun, this morning would feel like a secret they'd smuggled out of time. And maybe that was why it mattered so much. Because in a life lived under constant watch, some moments belonged only to them. That evening, long after the cameras had stopped rolling and the rest of the world had moved on, Minho returned home with a small paper bag in his hand. The rain had started while he was out, leaving his hair damp, his shirt clinging lightly to his frame. Hye Kyo looked up from the couch where she was rocking the baby, her eyebrows lifting in curiosity. "What's that?" she asked softly, mindful of the baby's slow, sleepy breaths. He set the bag down on the table and pulled out a small, delicate pastry wrapped in tissue paper. "You mentioned last week you'd been craving these," he said, his voice almost shy. "I stopped by that little bakery near the river before they closed." Her chest warmed, not just from the thoughtfulness of the gesture, but from the way he'd remembered something so small, so seemingly insignificant. She reached out and touched his wrist, her fingers lingering. "You're going to spoil me," she whispered. "Good," he replied simply, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. Later, when the baby was finally asleep and the apartment was wrapped in that deep, velvet quiet of nighttime, sat together at the table, sharing the pastry in slow, unhurried bites. Outside, the city lights blinked against the dark sky, but inside, the world felt still. "Do you think," she asked after a long silence, "always have mornings like today?" He didn't hesitate. "As long as we keep choosing them." Smiled at that, tucking the words away like a keepsake. In a life where schedules and obligations could so easily swallow them whole, the choice to slow down, cherish something as simple as breakfast and a song, was its own kind of vow. When they finally turned in for the night, Minho pulled her close under the covers, his arm curling instinctively around her waist. "Good night," he murmured into her hair. "Night," she echoed, her voice heavy with sleep, her heart full. And as the apartment slipped into silence, the memory of that morning, the music, the laughter, the warmth, settled over them like a promise. No matter how loud the world outside might get, in their home, there would always be space for moments like these. Because in the end, love wasn't built on grand gestures or the glare of the spotlight, it was built in the quiet rhythm of two people choosing each other, over and over again. Thank you for joining us in reliving this tender, heartwarming glimpse into Lee Min-ho and Song Hye Kyo's private world. We hope this story has brought you as much warmth as it did for us to share. Stay tuned for more unforgettable moments from the lives of your favorite stars. Until then, this is Red Carpet Revealed, wishing you love, joy, and goodbye for now.